Thank you. Our final speaker is Chris White, who is principal researcher and partner at Microsoft. Chris and his team at Microsoft are currently developing software for data science, focusing on the intersection of AI, artificial intelligence, and business intelligence for scalable interaction with data. Before joining Microsoft, Chris was a program manager developing advanced technologies for data science and leading President Obama's Big Data Initiative at DARPA. Please welcome Chris.
Thank you. Hi. So my first trip to the field with law enforcement landed me in Kabul, Afghanistan, in that top picture near the Queen's Palace. And our goal was to write software that would integrate sensor information from airplanes and vehicles and people and reporting and predict where bombs were going to go off and where troop movements would be less vulnerable to attack. It turns out just as important was to build data interfaces, visualization information, visual analytics, mechanisms for interrogating it, for validating it, for understanding it. And without that, all of the AI and statistics in the world wouldn't have been used because it was too costly to make a mistake. I mean, it's one thing if your Uber car goes to the wrong place. It's another thing entirely if it's your convoy or if it's a drone. Later, we worked on law enforcement issues around human trafficking, where we built software that enabled jurisdictions, district attorneys, NGOs to grab the subset of data on the web that might be relevant to a human trafficking investigation. So for example, that would mean, say, classifying an ad in an online escort site as whether it might contain a victim of trafficking or not, or connecting the organizational efforts to systematically advertise labor in sort of parts of Africa. Now, I thought that the proof of concept would be sufficient, but it turned out just as important was the fact that it was a modular open source software system. The modular part was important because law enforcement organizations, like every institution, have existing investments and are not in a vacuum when they make major technology decisions. And the open source part was important because of the need for transparency around privacy and surveillance, for understanding costs and predicting sort of maintenance plans. Coming to Microsoft, working with the Digital Crimes Unit, I really did learn again how the internet is a 21st century crime scene. And I thought I had a sort of a view of government and corporate interaction around things like crime, but those roles are kind of changing. For example, we're all comfortable here because we have confidence in the federal, state, and local law enforcement to keep the peace, around Berkeley, more or less, depending upon what day you're in. But if I were to ask you the same question about cyber, about your information, your identity, your computer assets, you might not feel as confident. And maybe some of you have had a tech support scam happen to you. A lot of people do. Almost 2 in 3 that we survey, really everywhere. Pop-ups, emails that are phishing, ads you click on, and they tell you to call tech support. Nobody call tech support, seriously. And these are scams that have nothing to do with Microsoft, except that they pretend to be Microsoft's tech support. Nevertheless, we have a responsibility to engage with that set of circumstances to provide the right kind of information to law enforcement. And then lastly, about the news. The news, as we know, has rapidly changed in the last year, where things like facts and figures are taking a backseat to storytelling, narrative, and other kinds of salience. And I think of this in a way like trying to understand how to interpret information from a person issuing a query. And the problem is when you stop trusting the organizations that are giving you information, then you're kind of have a little bit of a vertigo. Which of the outlets do I look at? What are they talking about? Whether it's fake news or extremism or otherwise, there is a real need to understand the contents of what you're seeing. And for example, like a nutrition label, to know whether what you're eating is health food for your mind or something. And this, we use artificial intelligence for just like the other 3 examples, where in this case it's finding the right kind of articles, extracting key information elements like people, places, and things, topics and sentiment, linking them into data structures that let you navigate them. But most importantly is it enables people. Our mission at Microsoft is to empower every organization and every person on the planet, which is a very bold mission statement that very few institutions could even try to have. And the way that we're doing it here is through what we call the democratization of artificial intelligence. And that, to me, means primarily access. Low cost, easy to use, doesn't require an advanced degree. If we can't meet those standards, then the impact of any of the work that's in the AI field would be very narrow. So, if we're getting back to law enforcement and enabling them with artificial intelligence, this news angle is important because it also tells people that might be vulnerable that they have a role in protecting themselves, and that people are vulnerable in the way that they are accessed, the way that they're influenced, and the way that their machines are touched. And so if I were to give recommendations for law enforcement to build AI into their capacity, it would be to have a user-oriented perspective with people at the forefront of decision-making, to have a modular and open source or transparent system for evaluation, to have the appropriate context with the roles of their organization and companies that provide data, and to empower people at low cost with ease of use. That with those characteristics, there's a much greater chance of seeing the positive impacts of the use of AI as opposed to only seeing the negative impacts. So no small task, but hopefully we're up to the challenge. Thanks.